Hi,
Hi,
Andy.
Katie.
Hi,
Hi.
Katie. Hi. Welcome. This is Two Girls Who Scare Easily, and we talk about the strange side of Colorado. Today we have part two of Katie's story about the Auraria campus. Did I say that right? Auraria? Auraria?
No, but that's okay. It's
How do you say
Auraria.
Auraria. Okay.
Auraria. Like
Auraria.
the Hyrax. Owie. Owie. Just, it's that.
It's that. It's that. It's got a darker history than you may have anticipated. So I'm excited.
Quite
It,
a much
yeah.
darker history. So a lot of the, dark spooky is gonna have to be in a part 3. I'm sorry, everyone. Don't worry, it's gonna be a standalone. I'll make it fun. I want to go back to our roots, to some good old-fashioned haunting, some apparitions. But it is just not possible to fit that into part 2. There is too much that happens in part 2, which also kind of gives credibility to, no wonder people are seeing shit on campus. There's just some stank energy. For folks who are just joining and are wondering why we're picking up in 1965, go listen to part 1. For folks who are meeting back with us, we're starting in 1965 because, shocker, that's when a flood happens. Which, floods never happen in Colorado. How do we talk about so many floods?
We've talked about a lot of floods this season.
There's
Yeah.
a lot. Why?
Yeah. Mountains. I don't know.
We're flooding the world with knowledge and joy.
Maybe it's a greater conspiracy. I'm not sure what it is. Something with the cryptids, I'm sure.
Slide
It's
Rock
the
Bolter. The Slide Rock
mhm.
Bolter listens
He's
to our
causing
podcast.
floods.
Yeah.
Um,
From the trenches that he
yeah,
digs down.
exactly.
That's fun.
Yeah.
Okay. So, all of that to say, if folks are wondering about the history of the Auraria neighborhood before 1965, again, go listen to part 1. If you're saying, why are you talking about history on a weird podcast? Well, I think that this spooky history is justifiable because, in a nutshell, the Auraria campus in downtown Denver is built on top of a neighborhood. And when I say on top of, I mean they leveled it in order to build the campus. And that is where we are picking up today. Picture this: Sicily, 1920. No, that's a Golden Girls reference. Okay, so picture this: June 1965. There's been, once again, about a 3-year drought in the region. They have not had a lot of rain. And now suddenly, about June 16th, huge thunderheads start forming in the foothills. Massive. People described the sky actually as coal black, which is how most of our flood stories start. There's been a long period of no rain, and then when moisture does form and come rolling in, it hits super hard and super fast.
In June.
In June. June is a very wet month in Colorado.
It's like the only wet month.
Yeah, hence all of these dang diddly floods. So that happens again, June 16th, all along the Front Range. And National Weather Service, once the storm hit, they recorded 14 inches of rain in about 3 hours in the mountains. So
that's a lot of rain.
Surged everything. Witnesses in Douglas County said that it was like if you had been stuck out in it and were trying to get under shelter, like it was hard to breathe. It was coming down so fast.
That's wild. I have been in rain like that, but it was not here. It was in Hawaii.
Was mine here? I have also been in rain like that. It must have been in Colorado, because I don't go anywhere else. That makes me sound so lame. That makes me sound
you go places.
Lame. I do go places, mostly in Colorado. But yes, I have also experienced rain like that before. So absolutely coming down. And again, it's coming down in the mountains where all of the ground is dry. It is not able to absorb water. Flood mitigation system, I don't know her, because this is 1965. So there is about a 20-foot wall of water that surges from the creeks in Douglas County and just outside of, like, up in the foothills and stuff. And it comes surging down because water will always follow gravity and the path of least resistance. And it turns out that this time it was downtown Denver.
Cool.
Specifically the South Platte and Cherry Creeks, which are right where the Auraria neighborhood was. Also, so is a lot of downtown Denver. There are pictures, like Alameda, there were cars that had been shoved into buildings on, like, Alameda. Like, this shit was flooded. Of course, the wall of water came in the middle of the night. So once again, people were extremely unprepared. Didn't really have any notice, had nowhere to go. Like, they didn't know what to do because somehow, for some reason, as we keep saying this, it's like we're hitting our heads against a wall. Nobody thought Colorado floods pretty frequently. This isn't the first time that a flood like this has even happened in Auraria. In part one, we talked about it in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. There were massive floods in this region. So this isn't new, and yet somehow the exact same scenario happened once again. No warning, no preparation, dark, nobody knew what to do, massive chaos. In total, the flood left about 100-mile stretch in its wake, because it was, think of it like a flash flood. It left about 100-mile stretch from Douglas County into Denver, that region, basically in ruins. Every bridge from 6th Avenue to Palmer Lake, 40 miles away, was either washed out or a skeleton, because the bridges had not been designed to handle that intense of water flow and had not been maintained to handle it. These were still turn of the century bridges, which at that point could have been at least 65 years old, if not older. The damage was likened to the 1976 flash flood in Big Thompson Canyon, which we talk about in season one,
I believe.
Season 1. In 1997, there was another flash flood that hit Fort Collins. And here are some pretty shocking facts just about the damage in Denver for this 1965 flood. Between June 16th and June 17th, so 2-day period, there's about 21 deaths that they know of. $540 million in damage, most of it to uninsured buildings and residential areas, because at this point, no one in Denver had flood insurance.
Yeah, that makes sense.
They didn't think it was a necessary thing. They figured, well, we're by creeks, we're not by rivers.
Yeah. It's because it doesn't happen regularly enough.
We say,
I don't have
everyone
flood
says
insurance.
that. Everyone says it doesn't happen regularly enough. And then we look at the cold, hard facts of history, and they're it doesn't happen enough, except for this year and 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 this year.
No, it happens regularly, but it's like a solid 50 years apart. And so you're like, oh, there hasn't been a flood in decades. What are the odds? Insurance companies are weird about flood insurance here too. Like
now they don't want to do it.
Even get it, yeah.
No. And that was also a thing, I'm sure, even if people asked, they said you don't need to. That's a whole other separate thing. And I'm not one to give any laurels to the for-profit insurance system, because fuck y'all. But when we're thinking about this, in which case entire homes were washed away, they had nothing. There was no financial recompense. About 250,000 acres were completely inundated, submerged. 15 Colorado counties experienced substantial damage. 33 neighborhoods were declared federal disaster zones, by President Lyndon B. Johnson.
So many neighborhoods.
And out of the phone towers were so wrecked that 10,000 telephones in Denver were out. No power. 20,000 statewide. 120 houses destroyed in Metro Denver, and 935 were damaged. 62 businesses, 16 bridges. Because all of this rainfall, the 14 inches was recorded directly in Larkspur, and that happened between 2 and 5 p.m.
Crazy.
in a 3-hour period. So, no wonder. The immediate aftermath was basically chaos. Police officers really did not know what to do. They didn't know, first responders, one, really couldn't help as the water was surging because they couldn't you just need to be out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
And they witnessed that they saw bodies just caught in the storm and sweeping past them. That gas leaks were causing fires, once again, like with the Pueblo flood. When just whole ass logs were on fire surging down a river.
Wait, were there any trains this time?
No, not that I could read. No trains got stuck in it, but trains were damaged. Not with passengers, but the rail lines were heavily damaged and took 3 days to restore. So not like that. There was also, in the immediate aftermath, especially at night, there were reports of substantial looting, that the National Guard had to pull out extra rifles from the armory to try and contain.
Why we can't have nice things?
Chaos. Just chaos. So this happens, and it is going to present the opportunity that Denver city government, had been looking for to urban renewal themselves.
Mm.
And it is because of this flood. So I want people to understand, well, why did it happen now? It happened because there was a lot of damage. There had to be revitalization projects and rebuilding.
Mm-hmm.
And then the government said, well, funny enough, we'd already been eyeing some places or some things. This is now the perfect opportunity to do it. So from there on out, the clock starts. Auraria Campus is not built until 1976. But the plan is in motion for a while. It is also not the only place that is urban renewed. After the flood, Chatfield and Bear Creek reservoirs were built. The Skyline Project, which basically completely modernized the stretch of Denver by 16th Street Mall and Curtis Street and stuff like that. That happens a few years after this, which is a whole other different thing because there's just some weird shit. And then there's pictures of the before and after of what the streets looked like before the Skyline Project versus after. And I think it is lacking the same color and pizzazz, but that is my personal opinion. We lost Theater Row. Lame. That's lame.
Yeah.
That's lame.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like in that kind of era of the 1970s, they were let's get rid of this historic look because now we have mid-century modern and just
and I
gold
love
everything.
And I love mid-century modern, but what I don't love is people wiping out the character of a location because they think that new equals better. That's not true. This is also when the bike path along the South Platte Creek was created, which a lot of people enjoy in downtown Denver now, and it's very lovely. They rezone. So they do a lot of flood mitigation now after this. They rezone things, they widen, they create places that will double as runoff to try and not have this happen again. And that's what a lot of this...
that Chatfield came out of flooding. I didn't realize it was this flood.
It was this flood. So those are also... They were designed to be water storage and runoff storage for flooding. Now there's advertisements for insurance companies offering flood coverage that you see in newspapers and stuff like that. So, good news, 152 thoroughbred horses were saved in apparently a dramatic rescue at the Centennial Racetrack. Yeah.
Well, that's good.
And I mean, the main reason that we're here today discussing this is the lasting effect of the flood began the campaign by the Denver Urban Renewal Authority.
Okay.
We're going to be saying their name a lot because the Auraria campus is their brainchild in a way. This is a whole lot of like civil services and bureaucracy and municipal government where everything is shortened and they're all really long names that are pared down into an acronym. A lot of that is happening. I'm going to try and keep it as streamlined as possible. But one of the acronyms to remember is DURA, and that is Denver Urban Renewal Authority. They are the group who are given the federal money to use in Denver urban development. They can use that money where they see fit. So, for various reasons that we will get into later, they're like the feds. Think that they're the feds. And the feds are the ones who want to repurpose the Auraria neighborhood into what is now known as AHEC. We're also going to be talking about them a lot. That stands for Auraria Higher Education Center. That is still what it's referred as. Like on campus, there is a building that everyone would call AHEC. You go to the AHEC office, and that was like an admin office for the 3 institutions, but like for the buildings themselves. Because again, all of the classes are their own universities, and so each of the colleges have their own space when they're dealing with like college specific problems. But if it is the building, there is an AHEC office that is still on campus. So I was very familiar with that one because I've been there. I am also going to drop a bit of a disclaimer. The whole story of the creation of AHEC is pretty nuanced and pretty exhaustive, and you could pull on thread after thread after thread of it. And I recognize that this is just an overview. There are a lot of community resources, one that I pulled from for this that I highly recommend you go read. There are books that are written by former residents of Auraria that describe what the neighborhood was like. There are books that are written by their descendants that have stories and pictures. Highly recommend going to those. There is not enough time to go into every detail of it, or we would be here forever. But if folks are genuinely curious about how this renewal project happened and why it smacks of lots of other urban renewal projects that were happening at the same time, you can research that, and please do. Please do. So this is not a complete retelling, and it is not meant to be. I found it absolutely fascinating, but it's more as a general introduction to people who might not know some of Denver's history, right? Like that's the whole fucking point. It also involves a lot of undercurrents of socioeconomic privilege and prejudice. There are so much of an undercurrent of systemic racism. This was deep in the civil rights movement, and there is a lot in Denver's history that if you don't know, you might go, well, why is this such an issue? Why is it so thorny? There is a lot of systemic and overt racism in Denver's history and in its founding and in its maintenance and the government officials who were elected. Like, it is no secret that the KKK was the government for a long time. And I say was as in like they were the mayors, they were the town officials, they were the police officers, They were actively, openly involved in the KKK. Like, they signed a book.
Like, it was in job applications. Like, are you a member?
So I do not go into that history in this part. One, because I genuinely want that to be like a separate, it needs to be a separate thing.
For sure.
But that is the undercurrent that is happening in all of the discussions of the Auraria neighborhood, of its reputation, of what happens in all of this. So I just want to make that clear. The third thing is I have my own peppers and opinions about how this was handled. And one, I'm also a white woman, so like talking about systemic racism, I fully understand that I have never experienced that, nor will I. So I get that. I tried to find as many sources of the people who were directly impacted as I could. I know. But when people in suburbs are like, I don't understand. I don't see racism in my everyday life. I don't understand systemic racism. This story is it. It just is. Because everyone who lived in the neighborhood was not in the room when the decisions were made. And one, that's just bullshit. And two, that's how systemic racism works, folks. So there was a lot at play here when it comes to the city of Denver, which we're going to think of as like a unit for this purpose. The city of Denver versus the neighborhood and the residents of the neighborhood. They are at odds. Just right at have been at odds, will continue to be at odds. But Denver has interests. And those interests are a growing city, a rapidly growing city, and a city that just got a lot of money through various reasons that will be explained. And they have a vested interest in keeping money in the city, and one of those ways was higher education. And like, I get it. You know, there's a lot at play here, and one of the big plays is the never-ending theme of a city needs to grow, resources need to be developed. Like, there's that push and pull of how much do you preserve and how much do you change with the times, because that is what your citizens who are living here need. So it's not like, I'm not saying that they shouldn't have built a university campus somewhere. And I'm not saying that it's not now a really cool idea. It is. I went there. It's a very cool idea. I liked Metro. I enjoyed my experience there. I like that there's 3 college campuses. All of those are good things. It's not that it happened, it's how it happened. That's what I hope people understand, because I will die on the hill that there is always a way. No, you can't make everybody happy, but there is always a way to revitalize a community that actually includes the community.
That's crazy talk.
Fuckers. In fact, one of the former city planners of Denver, who was interviewed, his name was Billy Bramhall, he said, "This is not to say that it was a mistake to clean up and redevelop portions of downtown, which included the build of the Auraria Higher Education Center. However, it is to say that it was done with a sword, not a scalpel."
That's actually a really good quote, yeah. Was he involved at the time, or did he come later?
I think he was kind of involved at the time. He wasn't part of the decision makers, but he was one of the people that once it was like, well, this has happened, here's the funding, and the project was a go, he was involved. So just, I'll be off my soapbox for now. And I want to give as true of an account as possible. But I'm gonna fucking get it out there now, because you're fixing to get mad. And that's okay.
It's like 75% of our episodes, at least.
Yeah, is that we're gonna get mad.
We're gonna get mad. Somebody's being shady, we're gonna get mad.
Someone's getting shady. Like, so just be prepared. Buckle up. There's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of the quiet part out loud. I think that we should call it what it is, and this was some fuckery. So let's talk about housing policy
Okay.
from the federal government, because you think that doesn't matter, and you would be wrong. It does matter. Okay, so after the flood in Auraria / West Denver, as people called it then, the neighborhood was basically gone. And it was also very slow / non-existent to receive any type of resources from the state, from the city. It was sort of forgotten about. It was described as an area of parking lots, junkyards, and some rental homes. So the city is eyeing it. What DURA, Denver Urban Renewal Authority, and the city of Denver are eyeing is, in their minds, this wide open space of junkyard. I am using quotes. I do not actually believe that that's what it was, because that is unequivocally not true, but that is how the city views it. That is how DURA will label it in official federal studies. It is junk, but it is valuable land that is just simply full of, pesky things like people. So they're eyeing
but
it.
like poor people and not white people.
Yeah. So, I mean, basically nothing. It's just a minor inconvenience. And they, as of a policy, as of the Housing Act of 1949, had suddenly come into the ability to get a lot of federal funding for urban renewal. The details of the Housing Act of 1949 there's a few, but the two that really mattered to Denver and for the purpose of our story are Title I, which authorized $1 billion in loans to help cities acquire slums and blighted land for public or private redevelopment. It also stipulated $100 million every year for 5 years to grants to cover 2/3 of the difference between the cost of the slum land, that is direct quote, and its reuse value. So the federal government steps in. This is a secondary bill that was passed after, the Housing Authority was passed based on the New Deal in 1933. It is giving the feds more power and money to then disperse out to cities with the goal of helping the cities. It also required, in the third stipulation, low rent public housing. This one comes up a lot, especially in Denver. This one comes up and everybody falls back. Anytime you're hearing the discussion of housing crisis and affordable housing in cities, and you're like, wow, has it always been like this? Yes, it has. It has always been like this. That doesn't mean it has to stay that way. So this required that public housing authorities, like DURA, if you're demolishing or renovating, they call it slum dwelling units, and that's just what it is. That is codified into our laws, so I'm using it. If you tear down buildings that people are living in, you have to put up something else. You can't just, all of this money was...
You can't just unhome people.
You can't just unhome people. You can't, in theory, this is theory. Practice, very different. But the theory is, look, guys, we will give you a grant to fund, public parks, flood mitigation, river walks, apartment buildings that are falling down that the city needs to rebuild, that will be affordable specifically to residents that are living on benefits. That's what we'll give you the money for. The reality is, most of the time, that's not how it plays out. And maybe there's one or two, but, it's a whole other fucking thing. But that's the goal. The goal is that they're like, we'll give you a fuck ton of money and you can level whatever you want to, but you have to put up something else in its place. It also provides funding and gives authority to organizations like Dura to conduct extensive research into the economics of housing construction and markets and financing in neighborhoods to determine whether or not they are an actual blight. So that's, in summary, the system gives itself authority to go into neighborhoods, determine whether or not the neighborhood is considered a blight and or a slum. Is there any direction or definition as to what would be considered a blight or a slum? No.
No.
If that neighborhood is then determined to be so, based on this study that they have already paid for, then the city can create measures to do something with it.
Mm-hmm.
Conveniently, you might wonder, so all of these blight neighborhoods, where are they? And it's just a shocking coincidence that most of the neighborhoods that are considered blights are also the neighborhoods that are predominantly inhabited by non-white communities and people who are of lower socioeconomic status. Maybe blue.
What?
What?
I'm shocked.
Your
What a
flabbers do look
crazy
gasted.
they are. What a crazy random happenstance.
That's just so rare.
I know. Who would have thought?
Like, ugh! Okay, so there were a number of reasons why Auraria was, in fact, lacking updated infrastructure and resources and the ability to maintain itself as a community. It was because they didn't have a lot of money. Why didn't they have a lot of money? Redlining. Fucking redlining, folks. And like, just, okay? So in summary, if you're like, I don't fucking know what redlining is, maybe this is the first time I've heard of it. One, it should not be. Please.
Unless you're the 11-year-old listening.
Unless you're the, honey, I'm so sorry. If you are the 11-year-old listening, I deeply apologize if I shatter any perceptions you have about the world. It genuinely is not my intention. I highly encourage people to read about redlining practices within the United States and how it was just like flagrant discrimination by, there's lots of other books. There's lots of that. But in summary, redlining is when financial services are intentionally withheld from neighborhoods and residents within those neighborhoods. And it is because of the color of their skin. It is because they are not white. And if they are not white, then banks will not offer them home loans. Neighborhoods will not rent to them. Real estate agents will either not show them properties or they will not be allowed to purchase those. All of that had been affecting the Auraria neighborhood for decades, really since its creation. Because even in part one, it had always been, it was a mining town, which is super working class because it's just tents and dirt.
Yeah.
And it was always sort of an industrial and blue collar center. And then in the 1920s, there's always it was very multicultural, primarily from various immigrant communities that sort of coincided along with the immigration trends that were affecting like all of the United States. So there were Czech immigrants, there were German immigrants in the 1880s and 1890s, there were Jewish immigrants at the turn of the century. In the 1920s, there was a large Hispanic, Chicano, Latinx population that, one, they were already there, but two, that do start to move there, mostly because they're getting pushed out of other neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
This is, 1920s Denver, 1920s Colorado is heavily influenced by the KKK, and they are enacting violence on BIPOC communities. Like, they just are. So people are going to neighborhoods where they can be safe and are even allowed. And Auraria, historically, has been one of those neighborhoods. But again, by that nature in a racist system, they do not get a lot of resources.
Mm-hmm.
And then Dura comes in and says, well, we're going to do studies on a number of locations that were impacted by the flood, and we're going to see what can be done with that land. And, shocker of the century, this study declares Auraria, West Denver, as a blight. It is, by its own terms and definition, a slum. And so because it is considered one of the areas that is a blight or a slum on the city, it is then put into the feeder for the Urban Renewal Authority. And, it's not the only neighborhood, like we said. It's also, this is not the only place that in this time frame, in the mid-60s into early 70s, it is not the only urban area that is experiencing this. This is happening in New York. It's happening in San Francisco, in Boston, anywhere. Because there is a movement to modernize. And I get the creation of an urban housing authority. I understand that there was a need, because prior to this, and by this I mean prior to the 1930s, there was no regulation for housing in cities, in big metropolitan cities. So anyone could just slap some shit. This was tenement housing.
Yeah.
That's what the Act of 1949 and the development of the HUD and the development of all of these federal groups were to try and correct that issue, because they had all seen, and we knew in historic record, tenement housing in New York City is a perfect example of why stuff like this is necessary, because people were living in absolute dog shit conditions. 15 people to a 2-bedroom clapboard house, factory dormitories, which don't even get me started on company housing. That's a different.
That's another episode.
That's another episode. That's for when we talk more about mines and mining culture and mine strikes.
Yeah.
But company housing is bullshit. So, okay, companies and governments are usually at odds with their citizens and balance of power. Folks, that's not how it's supposed to work. So, all of that to say, they were eyeing the Auraria neighborhood, but to the Auraria residents themselves, they wanted some pretty different things. They loved their community. They had very important cultural centers, namely Casa Mayan, which was a restaurant. It's so cool. There's a whole other thing. The family that owned Casa Mayan, it sort of became a neighborhood hub, and they had such good food that they were making for people, because they would allow people to stay there if they had nowhere else to go. A family owned the home, and then they ended up opening a restaurant out of the side, and it became a deeply important meeting place. Thankfully, it is still standing. Don't worry, everyone.
Good.
Don't worry, everyone. It is preserved. And so Casa Mayan was a big place that was in the Auraria neighborhood, and also St. Cajetan's, which was a Catholic church. There was also there was another Catholic church, Elizabeth of Hungary. There are a number of buildings that I think I list off later in here. But most of the organizing around preserving the neighborhood, the Catholic parishes that were in the neighborhood were deeply involved in it.
Okay.
So it was also, again, a community with a large Latinx population, which sometimes can be deeply Catholic. And in this case, it was. I'm not saying that not everybody who is like, who identifies as Chicano or Latinx has to be. But for this time period, church was everything. It was your center of community. It's where you got resources because the city was ignoring you. So you would go to your church. So Dura does a study, identifies Auraria as a blight on the community. And by the community, I mean a blight on Denver, the city.
Right.
Their words, not mine. And the question then becomes, well, what are we going to do with it? We need to do something. And at the time, the most obvious need, which was a real need, was some type of higher education campus. Now, Metropolitan College, which is Metropolitan State University of Denver, but at the time that was not its name, which is a mouthful. Trust me, folks. It was called Metropolitan College. It already existed, but it didn't have a central location. It existed in multiple buildings that it just could rent out and use as classrooms and student unions and stuff like that in downtown Denver. Some of my personal favorite, you're gonna love this, because this is so very Metro, as that being my alma mater. Like, of course, the unofficial student union was a bar.
Of course.
It was called the White Mule, and it was a bar on Colfax and Elati, and that was the unofficial student union. There was the Cherokee building, which was former floral warehouse that had then been adapted for classrooms. The YMCA in Denver, that's where physical education classes were held. So Metro existed, but again, it didn't have anywhere to go. It's also important to realize that obviously the city has a vested interest in people going to school and then staying there, because at this time, 1965, 1967, Denver residents were commuting sometimes every day to other universities. So the city was like, well, we need somewhere so that we can get people to stay here. And then if they stay here, then we have an educated workforce, and then businesses will also want to stay here because we have that higher level workforce available. And colleges are money makers in the areas that they're founded. There's a reason. It's also important to note that in 1956, so years even before the flood happened, the city had changed the zoning designations in and around the Auraria neighborhood to prohibit the construction of new residential housing.
Oh.
Wink. So everyone can make their own assumptions, and I am presenting the information. It just seems shockingly convenient that you, as a massive metropolitan area, change a zone that was a neighborhood to no longer be a neighborhood, and then somehow that neighborhood is denied vital resources like lines of credit to open business and, maintain homes or purchase homes, like keep property values low. And now, it's a blight. Oh, look, we have all this money. Oh, what are we going to do with it?
I mean, we can't build more houses, so it's the rules. I can't, it's not me.
Yeah, it's just the rules. I know I made the rules, but that's the rules. So that happened. And there were 17 sites that were listed in the study that was done by Dura. But Auraria was considered the best choice. And I mean that language sounds really harsh. That's in like the cold, hard facts of planning a massive university campus. It was flat. It was near downtown. It did have a lot of vacant lots and, former like mills and railroad loading and unloading, railroad depots that were no longer active. So yeah, they looked at it from, this is going to be the best case scenario. In the eyes of the study, it would do the greatest amount of good with the least amount of damage to the community, and completely ignored the fact that it did a lot of damage to one specific community. But that community wasn't white, so what do we care?
They didn't ask that community.
And they didn't ask. They straight up didn't ask. So that is happening. This is when, and all of these studies are like taking years. So we're now moving from the mid 60s to the late 60s to the early 70s. And that is when the city begins, now like it has given itself the evidence, and now it applying for grants and giving building plans and doing all of the inner bureaucratic workings to like get this shit green-lined. The neighborhood still doesn't know.
What?
Oh, oh, oh God, just wait. Just wait. And I'm also telling people this history of Metro because at the same time, Metro, the college that is really kind of the flagship of the campus, it's a baby, it's nascent, but it's there. And CU Denver, which is a satellite campus, it doesn't exist yet. CU Boulder previously said we don't want to open an extension, like a University of Colorado extension in the Denver area because there's nowhere to put it. So we don't want to lose our student base because we already are well established in Boulder and various other locations. And two, like, you don't have anywhere to go, so get fucked. And Denver was like, fine, we'll just build somewhere to go. So all of that is happening. They want to spend this federal money. They need to spend the federal money. And the city now starts working in order to get the green light and get these ballots approved and move through the voting process and municipal process. They start working with business improvement districts, which are legal subdivisions of the city. Here's a fun fact about a business improvement district. Say what you will about them, whether they're bad, whether they're good. We get a lot of our mixed-use urban areas because of business improvement districts, or we don't get affordable housing because of business improvement districts. Did you know that in Denver, I don't know if this is the same everywhere, but in Denver, a bid needs only 51% of the landowners within the specific area to form. So if there's a group of 10 landowners, you only need 5 of them. The landowners don't have to be living there. They have to own it. Do something with it, but own it. Then the city will designate them as a legal subcommittee. And then the city charges the property owners with a special tax that is distributed to the bid board. The bid board then spends that money. They're supposed to spend that money for the mutual uplift of businesses within any given district, but they tend to use it on services that will basically only benefit them. And to put that in perspective right now, because bids had a lot to do with the AHEC, the bills and the votes and the measures that are pushed through city government for the AHEC campus and creation, bids had a lot to do with being the voters that pushed that through. That's why I'm mentioning it. They are still a lot of the voting power to push through or lobby for certain measures when it comes to urban land use and business districts. And in their words, I'm sure they would say that we are a liaison between the residents of a city and the government of a city, making sure that all of our vested interests are acknowledged. I'm sure that's what they would say.
We have a lot of people who don't even live in Colorado that own buildings, so that's interesting.
It's interesting that if suddenly you are an absentee landowner and there's measures that the city is putting forth that maybe would be better for the residents but less better for you, now suddenly I'm shockingly against those. I don't live there, but I'm against them. And I have a lot of money that I can push for lobbying groups for people who do live there to swing them one way or the other. I don't know. But to put
Hot take, lobbyists and lobby groups are the single worst thing that ever happened to this country.
That is a hot take.
Hot take. I know that there are some that work for good.
There are some that work for a lot of good.
On the whole, I think the scales have tipped pretty substantially.
Currently, I'm very inclined to side with you. Guys, we know. I know that this isn't a political podcast, and it's not meant to be. I don't have a comprehensive understanding of the political system, but shit like this, which is history that is also inherently political, I'm going to talk about it. Because I'm tired of people not talking about it. So to put it in, I found this to be a fun anecdote. The owner of Sage Hospitality, who owns the Hyatt Regency and the Brown Palace Hotel, by the sheer fact that they own those two properties and the encompassing land, they own enough property within a bid to be able to trump any other stakeholders in a vote. So those two hotels versus however large their business district is against a mom and pop or a local place, wipe the floor. They could wipe the floor with them.
That system doesn't seem broken at all. It's fine.
I don't know. And that system is directly at play as we roll back the clock to the 1960s. Oh, I guess I was wrong. So you did have an extension campus? Where the fuck was that? Not there. I don't know. That's right. I ignored it because it wasn't accredited. So that's useless.
Yeah, fake college.
Folks, non-accredited schools are worthless. That's worthless. That's nothing. They took your money. That's a scam. Is it a scam? Yep. So the city wants to establish more community colleges, and they want to establish two major actual universities. They and say, Auraria, you're the place. And now they're starting with the help of the bids, the aforementioned bids. Makes me sound, that's hoity-toity. They start pushing through measures to lock in the funding. And the governor in 1965, his name is Governor Love, but he's not very loving. He also creates the Commission on Higher Education, the CCHE. And the next incumbent mayor, Thomas Currigan, tells that commission, pull the trigger on this. This has been lodged in bureaucratic limbo. We have been behind the scenes securing millions of dollars of funding. And now you are this commission. Use this study to identify the area, make it happen. So it's now being trickled down. Trickle down bureaucracy. Does that work? It doesn't. So their first stop is to figure out how much it's going to cost to buy the land. And the land in Auraria was valuated at 126.4 acres for about $12.5 million.
Okay.
Basement prices. Bargain.
Government usually gets the best deals.
Can you imagine how much 126 acres in downtown Denver would cost now? Like, it was actually
I don't
estimated for $12,671,392. Could you?
I don't
That?
think they'd even give you a number. I think they would just laugh at you.
Yeah. They'd be like, you're fucking full of shit. There are buildings, single buildings that go for more than that. So all of this information from the CCHE goes back to Dura because, again, Dura is the federal arm. So they're not going to release any actual money until the city comes back to them with plans and measures that have been voted on and areas. And Denver goes, fuck yeah. You could purchase all of that land, demolish all of the buildings where the Auraria campus is for 90 cents per square foot. So the total out of pocket that it would cost the city, in their eyes, was about $19 million.
That's insane.
So they created the budget and they're like, well, this is how much we're going to apply for because that's how much it's going to cost. And the feds are like, hell yeah, let's just wipe it all out. Because again, all of these people are looking at this tract of land like it's empty.
Mm-hmm.
It's not empty, but they're looking at it like it's empty. So they're like, no one's here. This is a steal, literally. So they get all of the grants. And then in 1969, this is when shit is like really kicking into high gear. There is a special ballot measure that is slated for the residents of Denver for the November election of 1969. So this is when everything becomes big because this is when the voting base gets to say yes or no to the city using eminent domain and creating this. It's like anytime we see on ballots where they're like, are you okay if the city raises taxes by XYZ? And then that money is going to go to the development of like community pools or whatever. Like, are you okay? The city still has to go to citizens and say, we want to do this. Are you okay with it? Yes or no? Are you prepared?
I don't think I am, but let's do it.
All of this behind the scenes for years has been happening. The city has known what it wanted to do. The residents of Auraria were not contacted at all about these plans until after the CCHE had received a federal grant and put shit on the ballot for November. The Auraria residents are notified that this measure is coming up in September of 1969.
Oh my God.
It was going to make me so mad. It's going to make me so mad, and I know it. I told you. I told everybody.
I don't even have words. Like, what?
3 fucking months. 3 months before your entire neighborhood is going to get bulldozed, and the city is like, yeah, it's gonna happen. You're fine with it, right?
Best case, do you know how fucking long it takes to move? To get the bank loan and to find a new place and to get all your stuff, like...
Yes. Like, practically, massive pain in the ass. You're already going to be at a loss. Culturally, historically, this is a community that had 3 generations of families living in it at one time. Sometimes, like, the grandparents would have a house, the parents would have a house, the kids would have a house. Like, it has been a cultural seat for the Denver Chicano movement since the 1920s. There are businesses that have been there for longer than that. There are churches that have been there for longer than that are absolute centers of this community.
Well, and then if the rest of Denver is redlined and won't let them,
let you there,
where are they supposed to go?
It's a great question. Where are they supposed to go? The city does not care. So the city chooses to give notice for the ballot measure by putting leaflets on people's doors. Leaflets that are, I will note, only printed in English.
They still do that.
Yes, they do.
They still do that. During COVID, there were forms that you had to have if you were an essential worker, and they were only in English.
That's fucking stupid. I said it. I don't think that that is a political statement. I think that is a practical, good human to good human statement. Why would you limit resources for people who need them? I don't know. I think that's fucking dumb. I think that's fucking dumb. And fuck you. So one of the articles, it was actually a master's thesis that I got my hands on. They said the state committees and all of the institutions did not even consider the reaction of the residents of West Denver, Auraria, throughout the process. They had not been involved in any of the decision making, even though they had the most to lose. One of the residents who was there at the time, Lupe Arguello, she was interviewed in a book called The History of Hispanic Settlers in Auraria, which is very good. She says, the first time people in the neighborhood heard about the relocation was when leaflets were passed out to every house. That was the first time we heard. That is just ignoring and frankly hoping that people don't have enough time to put up a fight. And here's where it gets interesting, because they put up a fucking hell of a fight.
I hope so.
All of the residents in Auraria immediately call local officials. Like, you know, they're getting these flyers that are like, hey, so in November, we're going to probably pass this measure, and that means that we are going to bulldoze your home. Okay? So they call, and they are trying to find out everything they can about what Dura and CCHE, when they say we're going to establish Auraria Higher Education Center in your neighborhood, they're like, well, what the fuck does that mean? The assistant pastor from St. Cajetan's Catholic Church, Father Pete Caldenti, and I like that name, he stepped up as a spokesperson for the neighborhood. There were also a number of other Catholic priests who were with St. Cajetan's and St. Elizabeth of Hungary and like a lot of the other churches. But St. Cajetan's became sort of the center where the resistance met. And they only had 3 months to fucking organize and to prove that keeping the neighborhood there was valuable. They weren't saying no to a higher education center. They were saying, can you keep the neighborhood and create that at the same time? That is what they were trying to prove. That's what they were petitioning for. That's what they were lobbying for. So again, lobby. Do I think that corporations should be able to lobby? No. 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 But residents or citizens, should they be able to lobby the government? I don't know. In this case, fuck yes. Yes, I do. Yes. And so
I'm so stressed out because I'm like rooting for them. I'm like, yes, they'll get to keep, and I know how this ends.
It is a titanic endeavor. It is a glorious, glorious, but ultimate shout into the void. It's not unimportant. So, okay. The residents of Auraria then get together and they officially form the West Side Coalition. So that is a major player, and that is who I will be referring to. When I'm talking about they or the residents, I will probably try and use West Side Coalition because they were the spokespersons for everybody in the neighborhood saying, we don't want this. The West Side Coalition was also a central organizing circle for Denver's Chicano rights and Denver activism. And even after the November vote, that group would continue to fight for equitable rights and issues throughout Denver for decades. This is also, again, peak civil rights movement, full stop. So all over the country, there are major protests and marches and boycotts. You know, this is the era of, it was right after, but the March on Washington and MLK, and this is everybody who is not white in America being like, this is fucking stupid. You guys know that, right? So that is this West Side Coalition and this fight for the Auraria campus, when you splice it in with history, is the same time that all of these other urban movements are happening. So At this point, Denver's population is about 500,000, and 17% of that total population was considered based on,
Census?
census data. They self-identified as Hispanic. Over 60% of that Hispanic population lived in Denver's west side, which was Auraria, Lincoln Park, Baker, and La Alma neighborhoods. So it was a fight for the direct residents, and it was also like, if you're going to take this, then what the fuck else are you going to do? One of the main spokesperson and one of the founders of West Side Coalition was a man named Richard Castro. He's also a big player in Denver history, and so he's like really cool. He's really cool. He died tragically of a brain aneurysm in 1991, which overall I think was sad for the city and the state government at every level, because he was a cool dude, and I feel like he did so much in his life, and I don't know, I felt deflated, like, God, you could have done so much more.
Right?
He and his wife, Virginia, met at Metro because they were students attending the nascent Metropolitan College in 1967, and they were taking classes. They met, fell deeply in love, got married, and Richard wholeheartedly supported Chicano rights movement and the civil rights movement by extension. They were both, then they went to DU to go to grad school, and Virginia was a nurse and was a social worker, and Richard immediately got involved in he just was from jump involved in the Chicano rights movement. Virginia actually says it was so ingrained in our family that this was what you did. We didn't even think about it. We just did it. They owned a house in Auraria, which was why he was invested in the West Side Coalition, because he believed that the neighborhood had a lot of value culturally and it could be revitalized and it was worth saving. During this time, during the organization and the protests against the creation, against the leveling of Auraria, their house is firebombed. He is threatened on the street. He is threatened by police. He is shot on Santa Fe. Like,
what?
They are put through the absolute rigor of despicable behavior.
What's wrong with people?
We don't have time for that lesson. We don't have time for that one. So he's a very cool human. People really need to look him up. After all of this shakes down, he is then elected to the Colorado House of Representatives.
Oh, cool.
5 times. And he becomes, when there's a new Denver mayor, Federico Pena, Richard Castro is his right-hand man, specifically with human rights and community relations. He does a lot of good, and he starts that good in all of this. He also forms an alliance between I want to make sure I get their name right. The American Jewish Committee. I knew I had that name buried somewhere, so I didn't want to just say the Jewish community, although yes, that is true. They had their headquarters at the Goldman Center, which was also in Auraria, because there had been, as in part 1, a large Jewish community that also lived in Auraria. There was there was a denser population in the 20th century, but they were still absolutely there and had also been suffering a lot of economic hardship and they had been pushed out because racism, anti-Semitism, if we're going to be fucking terrible, let's just be terrible to everybody, apparently. So they had also been redlined out of a lot of communities. They had settled there too. And the West Side Coalition knew that this is going to impact everyone. So they formed a joint group to try and increase and rally support in the greater Denver area to save the neighborhood. Because this is a tiny neighborhood and they're going up against fucking Cherry Creek and Cap Hill and Rhino wasn't what it is now, but all of these other areas that had money. and
Mm-hmm.
influence, and where the governor's kids go to school, like that type shit, you
Yeah.
know? So one of the meetings in October at St. Cajetan's, Dura was there, and they promised all of the citizens that when the ballot passes, that there would be assistance provided to them in order to relocate, and that there would be neighborhoods where they would be allowed to live, because this is still prior to redlining being out of practice and declared. It was declared illegal, but guys, it still happens, even in the year of our Lord 2025. But it falls out of favor. So Dura's coming in saying, like, yeah, we're going to take all of your shit, but we promise we'll give you a fair deal for your land or your home, and we'll help you move, and you'll definitely be able to go other places. No,
I don't believe him.
you shouldn't. The city editorials in the Denver Post start coming, because this is like a 3-month period. So like, this is a heated measure. There are protests in the Capitol Rotunda. Like, there are a lot of peaceful sit-ins. I got a really cool picture of one where the folks from St. Cajetan's and West Side Coalition built these big black coffins and put them in the middle of the rotunda, and they are painted with things like community vibrancy and all of this other stuff. So there are a lot of editorials in the Denver Post, most of them claiming in favor of the measure and saying that the creation of AHEC would have more opportunities. And if you think about it, in the long term, the opportunities would eventually outweigh the disadvantages experienced by the community. What?
I hate it. I hate it.
It's one of those, well, to play devil's advocate, it would be so much better because then your kids could go to school here. They were also asked point blank by the residents of Auraria if they would even be able to afford to go to the school that is destroying their entire neighborhood. There was no answer.
That was my thought. I'm like, if they let them in, if they can afford it,
if they can afford it.
the least they could do is be like, yeah, your kids will get scholarships.
That does happen later, but it is because of the valiant fight and the like dog fight in the civil rights movement, specifically the Chicano rights movement in Denver, to get their voice heard. They wouldn't have.
Yeah.
If the community didn't fight for it. Like, let's be clear, folks. They're not going to give them shit. These people are smart and organized, and they let the government know you cannot just mow over us. So there was also a pro-campus lobbying group. They were called the Citizens for Auraria. They were also holding meetings and distributing flyers all around Denver, emphasizing the central location of the proposed campus and saying this is why it would be a good thing for everyone. They took out advertisements in the Denver Post and Rocky Mountain News, which is so funny because the Rocky Mountain News started in Auraria.
Yeah.
And then wanted to maintain neutrality. He was the guy, he fucking wanted to maintain neutrality.
He was the guy in the river.
Yes, he was the guy in the river. So now there's ads saying the site is central, it's easy to reach from anywhere in Denver. Addressing the problem of displacing families, they claimed property owners will receive fair market value of their property. And so that's the best we can do. So that is really what the argument became. It fell along racial lines and socioeconomic lines. People who did not live in the area and were maybe of a wealthier class and maybe a lighter, whiter skin color, they had their own assumptions about the West Side for decades. That had been an ongoing problem. There was always this quiet part that the West Side of Denver was ghetto and was dangerous. And this would be something that would be really good for the community because we need something like this. And then the other side is this collaborative civil rights group saying, but these are human beings and we're not going to get a fair shake. Why do you have to bulldoze us in order to make this happen? They didn't get fair property values. Also because a lot of these homes were on land, like they didn't own it. You know, part of the issue with redlining is that you don't get lines of credit, so you can't buy your own home at all. So then you end up having to rent. And that means that all of these absentee landlords who are not maintaining their home, like they're not fucking there, but they're the ones who would be getting the money from the property being sold. A lot of these homes were not owned by the people who lived in them. They were rented. So that whole argument of market rate doesn't apply to them, doesn't help them. And the landlords don't live there, so they don't give a shit if they're offered pennies on the dollar. They don't care. So really, even up until a week before the vote on November 4th, the neighborhood had pretty strong support. And then, unfortunately, because again, there is a lot of Catholicism at play here, the Denver's Archbishop, James V. Casey, sent a letter to the Catholic parishes in all of Denver, and he pushed for supporting the campus.
Oh, get fucked.
Yes. And many of the Auraria residents figured, okay, so we're going to lose. We're going to lose. One resident said, when we heard that the Reverend had endorsed the Auraria project, we felt a terrible letdown and a sense of being forgotten, of being pushed aside by this person we had always looked up to as one of our beloved spiritual leaders. That was from a woman named Mrs. Germaine Aragon. So the vote happens and the Auraria bond wins. Eminent domain is now kicking into gear. There will be destruction. It will happen. What are we going to do about it? January the following year, Governor Love officially created the Auraria Higher Education Center, which functioned as the landlord of the campus. And the governor said, hey, heck, you are now in charge because you are going to own this property. You are in charge of communicating with residents and planning with the other federal and state agencies in order to set a date and make sure that everyone is out. They send packets of the information that includes applications for moving assistance, how purchasing, if they did own the land, how that was going to work out. Basically, all of the steps that the community members will need to know now that their home is being leveled was packet only that was dropped at the door. Packets were also only in English.
Of course.
Of course. And when Dura had said, you will receive assistance, there were now stipulations to that relocation assistance, that the residents had to move into housing units that were met specific criteria by Dura. So Dura said, here's this list of pre-approved places, and if you want us to pay for you to move there and help you get set up, these are the only places that you can live. It stated it intended to pay reasonable sums to help with relocation, explicitly, because packets still exist. Displaced families and individuals may be eligible for either 1, a payment to cover actual reasonable moving expenses, or 2, a fixed moving expense allowance not to exceed $300, plus a dislocation allowance of $200. Homeowners were eligible for up to $15,000 for their home flat rate. So if you rented and you needed to get out, you could get $500 max. If you owned, $15,000 for a home that was potentially in your family for 3 generations.
Yeah, and it's in the heart of Denver.
And is in the heart of Denver. You can go somewhere else.
Regardless of how well you've maintained that house, what size it is. Yeah.
Doesn't matter. $15,000, take it or leave it. Businesses were also given similar instructions. They could either apply for payment to cover moving expenses while they were searching for a replacement location, or a fixed payment equal to the business's annual net earnings, but would not exceed $10,000. Since most of the neighborhood was renters, they could receive moving assistance, but that would have required like a small, tiny amount of labor from their bullshit landlords. So landlords often just evicted them. They simply evicted them quickly. They said, "You're out." And then the landlords would make it seem like they were still living there and pocket the money for relocation.
I hate people so much.
Even at the time that this happened, the market rate for square foot in Auraria neighborhood was $10 to $25 per square foot. The Dura deal would work out to $1.45.
Fair market value.
Fair market value. And they also said in like not so fine print, like this is a fucking threat, you know, because they said in not so fine print, we have eminent domain. If you don't accept this offer, we will still take your home.
Yeah, and then you'll just get nothing.
There was still a resistance movement, and many of them were, at this point, it wasn't about trying to save the neighborhood, but it was about, there are some very real historical homes and locations. Those need to be preserved. This is happening. We didn't want it to, but now that it is, how are we going to save us? It was a salvage mission.
Yeah.
And some of them did just refuse to leave. So Dura had to have funds to basically like force them out. And they also then went through, like, they started squeezing on the people who didn't want to take the deals harder and harder and harder. And one of those was Dura would then go through, and if anybody was living in a home that was deemed to be unfit, which they could use that term liberally, they wouldn't get any money. They were basically now like, we'll say that your home is a blight and we will just take it and level it and we will give you no money. They did say that they would build a tent city if they were evicted from their homes. It was never really given any like credibility or legs. But this is, you know, now 1972. And it is right before the fight. Some of the buildings that they fought to save, St. Cajetan's, Emmanuel Shirith Israel Chapel, which was built in 1876. It was as an Episcopal church, and then it was converted into a synagogue. So now they were fighting, get these buildings registered in Denver's historic places. Why is that so hard for me to say? And that worked. So Historic Denver, which was already a movement under one, I believe her name was Dana Crawford. She is the reason that the Crawford Hotel was named that. Bit of a mixed bag, but she did some good to preserve. She set out to create the 9th Street Historic Park on Auraria campus, and that was her solution. So all of the historic buildings that could be moved would be relocated there. The bigger places, like St. Cajetan's and St. Elizabeth of Hungary and Emmanuel Israel Chapel, could not be moved, but they were designated historic locations, so they wouldn't be demolished. And then the homes would be relocated. So the Casa Mayan house is relocated there. The Golda Meir house, who was an Israeli prime minister, the one she lived in, which was in this neighborhood at the time, it was moved. Various others that were considered architecturally significant or historically significant. There was a merchant shop that was preserved that was on the corner. So they saved that as stylistic of the buildings, the businesses that had been in the neighborhood. The Tivoli Brewery, which had been closed since 1969, but it was also placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1973. So it was saved from being demolished. AHEC ends up buying it, and it becomes the Tivoli Student Union. That's where the AHEC office is, funny enough. And then demolition begins in 1973. So AHEC breaks ground. I mean, nothing's there, but, you know, I have pictures of the before and after. It is a lot of fucking space. And so demo 1973. They break ground in January of 1975, and then building is completed in 1976. Probably, unless I'm wrong. And then there's a dedication ceremony, and officially all 3 colleges, Community College of Denver, Metropolitan State College of Denver, and University of Colorado at Denver, move in. This becomes their official home, and they start classes. What happens after? Well, there is the 9th Street Historic Park that preserves a fraction of the homes, but at least some of the buildings. St. Cajetan's is preserved. Like I said, the churches are still there, but this is also when Richard Castro presents the leadership of Metro with so take care of the students. Like, what are you going to do what is your legacy going to be now that this has happened? He presents the college with a list of demands. It's a he said situation where Metro AHEC says we never agreed to those. The people who were in the meeting said, yes, you did. However, Metro, at least, Metropolitan State University of Denver, but that's so long to say, guys. Metro did create a scholarship for families and descendants, like immediately impacted families displaced by the campus and their descendants. I could not find any information, although maybe it has changed. I did not look up in 2025, but as of the 20-teens, Community College of Denver and University of Colorado Denver do not have scholarships to provide free education to any descendants of the people who were displaced. So almost immediately after the campus opens, Metro creates a Chicano Studies department. It, as with most like departments that deal with critical race theory and other things that are either highly politicized or considered thorny, doesn't receive a ton of funding initially. It is still there. The Chicano Studies Department still exists at Metro. There is still a chairman. There are still degrees in it. It still does a lot of work on campus itself. And most of that work is centered around keeping the memory of the Auraria neighborhood alive, making sure that the history of the community isn't lost, as well as, normal college shit. And that is a fucking doozy. But that is part 2 of the Auraria campus. So
I hate it. Not you. You did a wonderful job, but be better, people.
I was not shocked, but just continuously upset by how much this situation resonates across the country. And to this day, this conversation is still happening. It's still happening, which should not be surprising to fucking anybody.
No.
And it just is like, yeah, have we ever learned? Apparently not. And I went to Metro, and I liked my experience. I liked the school. I appreciated that it intentionally keeps its tuition low and tries to be as accessible and accommodating to non-traditional students as possible. That was a big thing for me. That was why I went, because not all the other colleges and universities that I applied to did. And I had friends who went to more traditional 4-year schools. And because they were non-traditional students, they felt like a complete afterthought or a nuisance. And the schools didn't do a damn fucking thing to help them navigate getting a 4-year degree and also having other pulls like children and full-time jobs. I do like that Metro still wants to attract students that are veterans, that are from either first generation college students or lower income families. I like that. I think that's great. I do know that in the past couple of years, they've had some issues in response to student-led protests. I did not attend at the time, so I cannot speak to that. And it is a cool idea. It is a cool campus. It is weird. And it's weird because of all of this.
Yeah.
So when folks are driving by and they're like, holy shit, why are there these schools in downtown Denver? This is the history of how it got to be there.
Yeah.
It's like Cheeseman Park without all the dead bodies underneath, except not really, because someday when we do a fun one-off, even after the campus was created, there was at least 3 murders that were documented on campus, definitely more.
Mm-hmm.
And it is for sure fucking haunted.
It has to be.
It has to
I
be.
mean, anywhere that was a mining encampment originally, like, there had to be so many murders.
Oh, yeah.
And deaths, and
there was fucking shootouts in the saloons that were in the neighborhood, murders, and that was just before the campus was a campus, and then the campus became a campus, and then there were like 3 or 4 murders that happened on campus. So plus all of this like stank residual energy.
Oh yeah, that's a lot
Haunted.
of energy. Yeah.
Haunted. But we're not going to get into that now. I have talked enough. Andy, do you want to take over and let people... can we do a fun episode after this? It got so heavy.
Yes. 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 Yes, I can do that. We can do that. If you just can't get enough of us, you can find us on social media. We're on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, 2 Girls Who Scare Easily with the number 2. You can also email us directly at 2girlswhoscareeasily@gmail.com, also with the number 2. Otherwise, yeah, maybe go watch some cat videos or something.
All hail Blucifer.
All hail Blucifer. Until next time, stay smart.
Stay safe.
And stay spooky.
Bye.
Bye.